Creative Babble.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a one-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
So today's guest is Dr. Jan Canty, a psychologist, author, podcast host, and she's a dedicated victim advocate. You may recognize her name because 4 years ago, Jan Canty was a guest on my show, Pretend, which we'll talk about later, but Jan's life took an unexpected and tragic turn decades ago when her husband, Jan Canty, a prominent psychologist in Detroit, led a secret life that shattered her world. And unknown to Jan, Alan was involved with a young sex worker, and he squandered away all their money. He neglected all the responsibilities that they thought they had together, and ultimately, he had a tragic end in a violent murder. And we're going to talk about all that, but in the meantime, Jan has devoted herself to helping others avoid similar heartbreak. In addition to her podcast, Domino Effect of Murder, where she connects with other homicide survivors, and she recently put out a TikTok series called Don't Con Yourself, which is what we're going to talk about today. And in this series, Jan provides crucial advice on recognizing and avoiding con artists. From each step, from the time you meet one to you are in so deep that you don't know how to get out of it. I mean, we're talking about romance scams. It could be roommate situations, you name it. And today we're going to hear from Jan about the red flags to look out for and her insights on how she rebuilt her life after betrayal. So welcome to Pretender. Welcome back to the Pretend podcast, Jan. It's been a while.
It has been, and it's always good to see you again.
Yeah. And, when we first met, you were not a podcaster,
No.
and you were actually for many years, like I said in the intro, you did not talk about your life experience.
Not for 30 years.
Yeah. And since then, I mean, you are a professional, even if we remove the tragic part about your husband, your ex-husband's life and all that, even if we remove that out of the way, you are a psychologist. This is your business, studying the human mind but now with your life experience on top of that, it makes for more powerful advice, right? So tell me a little bit about your work.
Since I came out of the closet and was able to talk about the homicide, I have devoted a lot of my time and energy to grief and people processing grief, particularly from homicide, but not exclusively. And as you mentioned, I've done that through books. I've written two. One is A Life Divided, which is more of a memoir, but the other one called What Now? Navigating the Aftermath of Homicide and Suicide is a reference book. It's a 450-page reference book that I tried to pare down from 600 pages that basically takes people through the reality of what do you do? Because all the information that's out there is so fragmented and you are not in a mindset to go gather it. So I'm trying to pull it into one spot. And then my daughters, who are now in their 30s, recommended TikTok to me. And I'm like, I don't even know about TikTok. But I got on it and surprisingly, I've had very few trolls. But I've built another network from that. That to me, those are both from the podcast and TikTok. My network that I have built is so invaluable. I did not expect that. And I cherish it.
And let me tell you that I'm blown away by your TikTok in particular because it's so good. And I reached out to you after your 7-part series, Don't Con Yourself, because, I mean, my show is obviously about people pretending to be someone else, con artists, but you were able to break it down with some really useful advice for each step of the way, what to look for. And I just want to jump in there and talk about your series, which I highly recommend everyone check it out after this. And I'll have a link in the show notes. But, it was interesting how you organized the TikToks from the beginning, middle, and late stages in terms of interacting with some of these individuals who are narcissists, psychopaths, sociopaths. And you had a statistic right off the bat that was really mind-blowing. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that is the reality that no matter where you are in the world, 1 in 10 falls under that umbrella. Psychopath, sociopath, antisocial. And it's all, socioeconomic groups, male and female, different ethnicities, doesn't matter. And so right off the bat, you have to be thinking, is this person I'm going to be engaged with, are they the 1 in 10 or are they the 9 in 10? But be open to the possibility.
But, we all know somebody that kind of fits this
Absolutely.
description. But to think that
Absolutely.
1 out of every 10 people that we know falls under this category is pretty frightening, right?
It is. It is. You don't have to look far.
So let's jump in with some of the tips that you talked about, because I thought they were really useful. And one of the things that you talk about in your first video, let's say you're dating someone. A lot of people are on dating sites. They're meeting people for the first time. These are complete strangers. And you talk about gathering information, right?
Right.
That you can't be so cynical that you approach the world thinking that everyone, 10 out of 10 people are con artists, but you still got to be smart and pay attention to some of the signs, right? So what
Right.
are some of the first signs that you should look into?
I think the first thing is to go in with a mindset of understanding that con artists are really looking at people as supply chains. They have a parasitic lifestyle, and you don't want to lend yourself to that. And so you look at your own life and say, what would they want from me? What do I have to offer them in terms of a supply chain? And one might be, do I have money? Do I have valuable connections? Maybe my dad is a judge. Maybe my sister runs a security store. Maybe I have valuable skills, like I'm in the IT industry, or maybe it's simply my reputation gives them a cover of respectability. But understand that we default to our own level of truth. If you tend to be a trusting, optimistic, the wind is at your back person, that is what you're going to project onto others. And that makes you more attractive to con artists, as opposed to somebody who's more skeptical and discerning and have a trust but verify attitude. So your mindset and your awareness going into the first encounter is important. And then once you arrive there, you want to go slow. And that is doubly true if you are in a vulnerable mindset. Maybe you just got served with divorce papers, or maybe you have just broken up. That means you're more vulnerable, and they can detect that. It's like a blade of perfume in the air. They pick up on vulnerability, and they are going to come in for the kill if they detect that. So keep extra careful, or don't even date for a while would be my advice. And once you're involved in, let's say, a dinner situation with them, you want to keep the focus on them. They are going to push back on that because they're going to flatter you, and because they're trying to find out, what do you have to offer them? What is your supply that they need? And so you don't want to do that. You want to find out what is it about them, and ask verifiable questions like, where did you go? Did you go to college? If so, where? Where do you live? What's your job? I mean, not in that rapid fire of a fashion, but you want to ask verifiable information and keep the focus on them. And if they push back a lot on that, that's a red flag. But you
Yeah.
also want to look
Well-
for inconsistencies. If they tell you they're a massage therapist and their hands are beat up and calloused, that's not consistent. Or if the picture they posted on that social media website is not the person you see in front of you, that's a red flag.
Yeah, and everything you're saying right now, all these little red flags, it's not like you're going into that first date as an interrogation, right?
No.
You definitely want to be in the information gathering stage, because
Exactly.
I mean, I read the book, How to Make Friends and Influence People. Like the way you charm someone is to ask them questions about themselves. People love being asked about themselves and talking about themselves, right? But in the process, you're collecting this data. And like you said, collecting this data, where you go to college, all these things you could verify and try to see if there's any inconsistencies in
Right.
their answers, right?
Right. And you also want to look at them, and do they present as too perfect, maybe even overdressed? Because real people aren't perfect. They slip up. They aren't polished. They aren't right off of a movie set. But the more they appear that way, that's another red flag, because real people are not perfect.
There was another thing you mentioned that ties with this idea that real people aren't perfect. you caution about overly charming and seemingly flawless people, which you
Right.
would think that that would be a quality that you want in somebody. Well, why should we watch for that?
Because it's an adaptation of real life. It's an actor on a stage. It's the difference between a first date and your 10th anniversary in terms of how you behave to one another. A golden rule of thumb in psychology and understanding pathology is this: the more separation, the more difference there is between one's professional, I mean, not professional, between one's public and private demeanor, behavior, the more pathology there is. Well, they're giving you the public demeanor, but behind doors, what are they like? And if you find a great disparity, that's a red flag. The closer they are together, the more positive they are, the more genuine they are. They're not putting on airs. They're not trying to win you over with as somebody told me, the sizzle on the steak. They're just being who they are.
Yeah.
Blinds.com's Black Friday sales event is happening now with our best deals of the season. Let our design experts help you make the perfect selection for your home on your schedule. We can send free samples right to you and handle everything from measure to install. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 50% site-wide, plus doorbusters, and a free professional measure at the Blinds.com Black Friday sales event now. Rules and restrictions may apply.
And, while we're on that first date or the first couple dates and you're learning about each other, you're asking yourselves questions, a lot of times first dates feel like job interviews.
They do.
But hey, where did you grow up? Oh, I grew up in the South. And then what are some signs like if you mentioned that if they use inconsistent language that does not jive
Correct.
with where they're from, that's something to watch out for
Right.
too. So
Yeah,
list
that's
some of those
subtle.
inconsistencies.
Yeah, there's regional expressions if you grew up like my husband now, he grew up in Florida, and he'll use Southern more expressions like he'll call it supper, I call it dinner. He'll call it spigot, I call it faucet. It's subtle, but it's consistent with his history. And there is even a Reader's Digest map of regional expressions you can look at that shows you, and this is what FBI and CIA look for too in terms of interrogation, is they're so subtle that people don't even know they're saying it. And so if somebody is consistently using Southern expressions, but they say they're from New York, that's like, what? That doesn't fit. There's some story there that you got to figure out,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
I mean, eventually I've lived in the South. I'm from Florida, South Florida, but I occasionally now use y'all, but I think I've lived here long enough that
You've earned
I
it.
I could I've earned it, but I don't say it too often because it still
Yeah.
doesn't feel natural. But
Right.
one thing, and this is something that I don't do, but I know a lot of women are very in tune with like hands and like wedding rings. And what should
Uh-huh.
you watch out for, like physical signs that you should look out for?
Right. If somebody says that they were never married or they've been long divorced, and you look down at their hand and you notice that their ring finger on their left hand has a tan mark that's visible or an indentation from removing their ring on their finger, that doesn't jive, because what we know is that on average it takes about 7 months for that to dissipate, that indentation, once it's been there.
Yeah, that's a really good sign. And then you also talk about observing their behavior. I mean, we're still in that first date scenario, right?
Right.
And
Right.
you say, notice how they treat other people. Like, give me some pointers
Like
there.
like the wait staff, maybe the valet, or how they talk about their landlord or their boss or police or whomever it might be. They're telling you who they are, and that's when the veil can fall. They might be trying to give you a positive impression by being rude to the wait staff and bossy. Well, that tells you what they think of people that they don't deem as on their level. Is that the kind of person you want to be around? And so how they talk and treat other people is very, very important. Even driving, do they cut off everybody? Do they have to fight for that 3 feet of space in front of them? Or do they, are they patient? And I recommend everybody getting involved with someone to sit in a traffic jam with them for 2 hours.
Right.
Then you find out a whole lot.
A lot. Yeah, for sure. But all these things that we are mentioning, very specific tactical things that you could do on a date. But at the end of the day, we all do this when we meet somebody new. We're kind of taking this inventory of what we think is acceptable behavior and what's not. And all that, it's in your gut. You have this gut feeling. And how important is your gut at this stage in the game?
Incredibly, probably more so at any stage, because it's unfiltered. And a great example is to just look at what your dog does, because dogs always operate on their gut instinct. If a dog, let's say it's 1 a.m, there's a noise outside and a dog gets alerted, what do? Do they sit there and try to talk themselves out of it and say, oh, that's probably my neighbor driving by? No, they're going to be tuned in and alert and ready. They spend their energy that way than talking themselves out of it. And that's because they're using their gut. They're not using their brain to do it. There's what we call sometimes people refer to it as secondary brain, our gut. You ever notice if you're very upset, your stomach can be queasy? That's because it's reacting to an emotionally charged situation, but it does not have the capability of the frontal lobes, which process thinking and make decisions on a cognitive, rational level. And women overthink things in particular. Well, he didn't mean that, or I think I must have misunderstood him. It's to put that aside and just trust your gut reactions. That's going to take you farther. If he prematurely touches your arm and it gives you the ick factor, that was kind of weird. Don't dismiss it and say, oh, I'm a prude and I shouldn't be that way. Tune into it. How does a dog react if you touch him prematurely and you don't know him?
Right.
There's something in that. And it's not that any one of these is so critical. It's the totality of them that you have to step back and look at and think about and review once you get home.
Yeah.
And that's why.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Like,
there was a CIA agent I listened to talk on a show, and he talked about CIA agents using, believe it or not, this very simple technique when they're trying to curate an agent for them and they're trying to discern if they can be trustworthy or not. They gather 2 jars with 2 different colored marbles or stones or whatever. And for everything that's a lie or it's an off kind of thing, they put in one jar and vice versa in the other. And they keep an eye on that. And the reason they do that is because it is so easy to forget what your reactions were long after the fact, or it's so easy to let your emotions color what your memories are. But this is an objective way to say, now I've known this person for a month. There's a whole lot in this one jar and not enough in the other, or vice versa. It might confirm that this is an okay person.
When I was watching your series, I was wondering if you were recommending that people literally get 2 jars, or is this something that you're taking note of? Can you do the same thing on a notebook or like tally?
Well, the CIA agents said that they sometimes will write it in a notebook, but most people get lazy and don't do it after a point of time. It's much more effort to pull up. And secondarily, they could worry somebody else could find the notebook. Like, what is this in here? What did you write this? What's this mean? Whereas if you have 2 different colored jars, nobody's going to pay attention.
That's true. That's
And
true.
it's easier and clear. Just toss it in and be done with it.
And we're gonna continue to talk about this jar, because this is something that it's, even though it's a tangible thing that you can do, it's a metaphorical symbol throughout this relationship. So we talked about that first date, maybe the first couple dates. Now you get home, and what do you do with all these data points that you collected, either that you jotted down or that you observed?
You continue to observe. You continue to use your 2 jars. You keep an open mind, and you're in a wait and verify mode. You're not going to dismiss somebody based on maybe one night, unless it's very glaring. But what you want to do is reflect and think about it. And I think too often after the first date, people get swelled up in this mix of, I felt flattered and I was very attractive to him or her. And that's where their head goes, instead of stepping back and being more objective about what happened and what was said and done. But review it in your mind from start to finish. How did he treat the valet staff? How did he treat the waiter? How did his hands look? What verifiable information? And then you go and you look up the data.
Yep.
There are reputable websites to do that, such as www.truepeople.search.
Yep.
And you look up the data, and maybe you'll find it's confirming. If somebody's telling you the truth, they have nothing to fear.
Yep. And, these people search websites that I've mentioned them in the show before. They're out there. They're publicly available. They're just data sources, right, that are pulling from all kinds of places.
Right.
But if they tell you that they are from Florida, you could see that where their previous locations were. If they tell you
Exactly.
they have a cousin named Tony, Tony might be a possible relative, and you could start confirming things and put your sleuth skills to work. And it really doesn't take long. It's just you plug in their name and where they're from, and voila.
And see, how I see that is it's very similar to what our aunts and uncles and grandmas used to do 20, 30, 40 years ago when they knew the family and set you up on a date. They've already done all that hard work, but we're meeting people who are strangers. So we now have to put this a task on ourselves because we don't know them in the community. We don't know their family. And we don't want to be, it's a lot of work, but I'll tell you what, it's a lot less work than trying to roll it back once you're too involved and over your head.
Yeah. Yep. And that's, you now you're kind of in it. You like this person. You kind of verified they seem okay, but maybe you miss some signs and you are with a narcissist and you just don't realize it, or a con artist, right? What you mentioned in one of your videos that you would like to gather more information, and some information could be, hey, show me some pictures of your childhood, your past, or whatever. And how should a normal person versus a con artist react in that situation if you asked to see some photos?
Yeah. This one I learned from a TSA agent. Somebody who's hiding something will be reluctant to hand you their phone and let you control it. They're more likely to flip through it and find the picture and show it to you and take their phone back. So the more they hold on to it, the more, cautious they're being. And you don't know why yet, but it's, again, just one of those things you tick off in your mind like, oh, that's different.
That's just another jar, another marble in the jar,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
That's right.
And-
That's right.
And one other thing that you talk about in your video, which is a word that gets either misused or overused, but I do think it's appropriate in this situation, which is gaslighting. A lot of people throw that word around a lot, but this is another data point, right? Like, people do gaslight other people. And by definition, it's when, a person tries to cast doubt against your own judgment, against the way you react to things, or your own point of view, right?
Right. It's making you doubt your own reality. So an example might be if you're having a conversation with them and they said something and you clearly remember it, and then you bring it up and they go, I never said that. Or I never said I knew them. And in your mind you did. It's like, it makes you feel crazy. But again, it's one of those things you put in the jar because it's a frequent tool used by con artists to make you doubt your own reality so that you can subtly adopt their reality. I would say the overarching theme of the second, third, and maybe fourth date, if you get that far, is to get to know their broader circle of people, their friends, their family, their work associates, their neighbors, their kids, their tenants, whoever it might be. You want to broaden your circle and get to know, because friends are a reflection of us. And if their friends give you the heebie-jeebies, that says something.
Yeah.
Or if their parents are really off the wall, odd folks, or he doesn't want you meeting them, or he gives you a different story about you can't see them because they died, and you remember in the first date that they're living in Florida. I don't know why we keep picking on Florida, but
It's
they're
easy
alive.
to do.
They're alive and well someplace. That's something to wonder about, like what's going on. But you want to see them in their social context.
Absolutely. And this next one, this is the one that we should all, this should be the biggest red flag of them all, is that in your video, you say, people who have dramatic and unusual histories should be a really, really big red flag, right? I mean, we've heard about all these romance scams, and tell me, that's pretty obvious, but now that we've watched all these documentaries and podcasts, but why should we look out for the next Tinder swindler?
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're trying to wow you, obviously. If they were a CIA agent, they're working undercover. Plus, it gives them a great excuse to not to have to divulge much information to you. But the more dramatic and unlikely their narrative, gee, the more you got to pause and wonder because everyday folks aren't that way. They don't have jets and fly internationally on a weekly basis or no politicians that are placed high in the sky and it's not impossible that people can't be airline pilots and have purple hearts from combat. That does happen. But when it's like, come on, and when you reach a certain tipping point, you got to step back and wonder. And that's again where you go into and try to verify what it is they're
Yeah.
saying. And it just because that's not everyday life. That's a mirage.
Yeah.
You know.
We talked about the indentation on the wedding ring, but there are some other physical signs that you should look for, and you mentioned tattoos in particular. And why are tattoos something you should at least take notice of?
I would at minimum notice them and perhaps ask about them. It's not unusual today for people to have even sleeve tattoos or even on their face occasionally. I saw a lot of that when I was in New Zealand. But at any rate, there are certain tattoos that are indicative of prison life. There are certain tattoos that mean you have been sex trafficked. And they certainly, at minimum, say something about your values. My son-in-law, who I love to pieces, has a sleeve tattoo. And I asked him about it. Why this? Why that? And he had a good reason for each of them, in memory of somebody. And he said, this one I wouldn't so much do today, but it means blah, blah, blah. It was not a offensive kind of thing. But if you don't know what they mean, at minimum, take note of them, either look them up or go to your local tattoo guy and say, hey, what does this mean? And they'll probably know. And
It could be a prison
because
tattoo, right? Like that could be a bad sign.
or how many people they are boasting that they have put under the ground
Yeah.
or want to. I read somewhere that an empty teardrop means they have the intent to kill but haven't completed the act.
Yeah. I mean, all these things you should take note of. And, one of the things that you talk about is, in my experience covering con artists, they're very generous at the beginning, right? Like they pay for all the meals, they buy you stuff, and then things kind of start going south. Maybe their wallet is they forgot it at home, or their card is declined, or their car broke down. What are some of these issues and red flags that we should note early on in the relationship?
Well, that wow factor is throwing money at you, sending you flowers, or taking you out to expensive meals, or even a vacation, as it might be, with the hope that they can lure you in quickly. Because their whole program is to get you to act quickly. It's like a used car salesman. Act to the this price is only good for the next hour. That's what they want you to do because it takes time to get to know people. You want to see them in that traffic jam. You want to see them with their relatives. You want to see how they do when you're feeling sick and you have to cancel at the last minute. That all takes time. So by showering you with expensive gifts, they're trying to hasten the whole process up. That's the entire program. Let's hurry this up. And that is so appealing to people today who are impatient. If there's one piece of advice I could give people is to go slow. Take your time. Do not date or get involved with anybody in a quick romance. Most of the time, it's not going to work out. Most of the time, they're doing it because they're impatient and also because they don't want you to see their flaws. They don't want you to see the truth behind the showcase. And so by rushing you along and showering you with gifts, you might not notice and you'll be willingly pulled into their view of life and be willing to give them that supply chain that they're seeking. So what this stage 2 is about is knowing what your personal boundaries are and enforcing them, pure and simple. And the person that shoves back the most is the person that needs the boundaries the most. No matter what that pertains to, money, the courtesy of telling you an hour in advance if they're going to cancel, if at all possible, whatever boundaries it might be. You're not moving in with me. I hold the keys to my apartment. And there's no negotiating on it. Whatever your boundaries are, think them through, make sure they're realistic and well thought through, and then stick to them. That's pure and simple. And they're going to fight you on it if they have a hidden agenda.
All right, so that is the first part. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what happens when you miss all these signs and you continue forward with the relationship. So more with Jan Canty after the break.
Is it time to reimagine your future? The right business skills may make a difference in your career. At Capella University, we offer a relevant education that's designed to focus on what you need to know in the business world. We'll teach professional skills to help you pursue your goals, like business management, strategic planning, and effective communication. And you can apply these skills right away. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Okay, I have to tell you, I was just looking on eBay where I go for all kinds of things I love, and there it was.
That hologram trading card. One of the rarest, the last one I needed for my set. Shiny like the
designer handbag of my dreams. One of a kind. eBay had it, and now everyone's asking, ooh, where'd you get your
windshield wipers? eBay has all the parts that fit my car. No more annoying, just beautiful.
Whatever you love, find it on eBay. eBay, things people love.
So we're back. Jan, you were telling us all the signs that to look for when we first enter a relationship, when we're smitten and we're blinded by love. I mean, everybody loves the beginning of a relationship because it's like the best part.
Absolutely.
It's the best part of the relationship.
Yes.
And you just ruined it, Jan. You're adding all these rules and making people very like doubt everything, you know? But let's say you missed all the signs and now you're in it a little bit and you decide to move forward with this. You know, one thing that you should look out for, and according to you, then your video on TikTok, is that what happens when somebody just, you know, suddenly cancels plans and they disrupt the pattern that you expect to have? Like, how important is that at this stage?
It's important because it happens. That's real life. You know, your child gets sick or your car breaks down or you have to work, whatever it might be. That's real life. And people who have compassion and empathy and patience will roll with it. You go to plan B. You're disappointed, but okay, let's do A instead of B or B instead of C. But people that take it personally are offended by it and are angry about it and try to guilt trip you, that's a red flag because that's life. It's going to happen probably more than a handful of times. And you're better off looking at that early on and deciding, is this person willing to walk with me on these issues? Or are they going to guilt trip me? Because I need to have someone in my life who's flexible when things have to change. I'm not talking about willy-nilly, you know, being changing your mind every 5 minutes about what it is you want to do. But when there's real things that come up, it's a show of empathy and respect if they roll with it with you. They can be disappointed, but they don't have to be angry about it.
It's so crazy because everything we've talked about now sounds very familiar, right? Like we've all either seen friends that have had those type of relationships, right? That where some guy they're dating freaks out about, you know, something changed. And like, I would have never before this conversation thought that maybe that person could be a narcissistic, you know, manipulative, potentially a con artist, right? Like we've all experienced this. And the more we progress in our conversation, we're going to get into people who really cross the line often. But this next part, I think, is probably the most important tip that you gave in your entire series, which in this day and age, you know, we often like even, you know, share our phone password, you know, or share our computer password or loan our car to them or loan them the key to the house or give them a key to the house. How dangerous is that at this stage?
Very dangerous. It's premature. And if they push it and you say no, again, that's a boundary violation. And so the more they push when it's a reasonable, you know, request and boundary, the more you got to back it up. Go find yourself another supply chain. I'm not going to be a part of this.
Well,
It's
but
disrespectful.
even I see it even with young relationships, like sharing location. You could do that now. You could. People
Oh,
are
absolutely.
demanding. Partners are demanding. Hey, I need to know where you're at, and I'm like, you just started dating. Why do you even need to know that?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
But we
That's
feel the
right.
pressure to
And
do it. Right. To
you feel the pressure if, again, you're defaulting to your original position. I said a minute ago, if your default position is one of trust, you're going to think you're the bad guy in this decision. It's me. I don't trust. I'm paranoid. This is a sign of love to give them my password, to let them know my location. That's bull.
yeah, add that
That
marble in the jar for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I'll say it. I know I've been married 17 years to my husband now, and I want him to know my location.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm out at night or I'm driving long distances,
Absolutely.
and I would trust him with my last dime.
Right.
But
But
he
he's
earned
earned
it.
it. Yeah.
He's earned it, and I trust him with our children, and that didn't come easy because I adopted them, and then he adopted them after I did, and they love him to pieces. But he earned it. It didn't come because he demanded it. Oh no, that would not have worked.
Right.
Mm-mm.
But I could see how you could crumble under that pressure. Like, well, what are you trying to hide? Why wouldn't you share your location with me?
And that's a good time to step back and say, look, how are things here? Are they equal? Do I know as much about his passwords? Do I have the keys to his apartment? Do I have the keys to his car, et cetera, as he expects me to give to him? If it's unequal, then why do it? And since when did this get equated with love? I mean, this is part of your independence and your autonomy. And anytime somebody's trying to undermine that, they're not working in your behalf.
Yeah. And
And I would rather have them upset and back out and say, I'm not going to be with somebody who won't share passwords and sign a co-loan and blah, blah, blah. And I'd say, there's the door. Bye. Then have the awful experience that I went through a second time.
yeah. And you talk about this, we're deep into the relationship, not too deep, but we're getting deep, and you're seeing
you're
yourself.
exclusive.
Yeah, you're exclusive. You're dating regularly, and you talk about the early attempts to control you under the guise of being your benefactor. Yeah,
Yeah, let's move in together. Let's have a baby. Let's move away. Let's not have two cars anymore. Let's share our bank accounts. Anything like that, because it's still too early not to be portable. You want to maintain your independence. And it's the push factor that I think would be a red flag. Not that eventually can't happen down the road, but when it's premature, it's not healthy.
yeah.
I know this is a very unpopular stance, but I'm going to say it, and it shows my age. But I'm going to say it
Go
anyway.
for it.
Most people waited until their late 20s to have their first child. A lot of problems we face would be
You
solved.
save a lot of money.
People put the cart before the horse all the time
Mhm.
and then wonder, gee, why did I get raped? Why did my child get abused? All these things are preventable if we are mature and really, really ready to make such a commitment.
Or really
It's
know
lifelong.
who your partner is.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And one thing that we haven't talked about is your friends and your family, and how should you
Oh,
take stock into what they say? Are they afraid to tell you the truth?
I would look for a common denominator, particularly among people you trust. You're always going to have a relative that, is going to find fault no matter who you're with. And you might want to take what they say with a grain of salt. But when you really trust somebody and you know for sure that they have your best interest at heart, then go to them by all means and say, be honest with me. No holds barred. What do you think of this person? Is there something I don't know about them that I should know? Something maybe you observed or know about them? You're not going to hurt my feelings if you tell me. I need to see them through your eyes. Would you please share that with me now? Because I don't want to get any further down the pike with this individual. If there's red flags I'm missing, I need to know. And if two or three people are telling you the same thing, well, I wouldn't dismiss it. I'd take it to heart.
But a lot of us get to this stage because we're in a state of denial, right? Like sometimes we don't even welcome this advice from our friends and family.
That's when your jars come in handy. You can't deny them if they're if one's filling up and the other one's not. That's what the purpose of those is for,
Yeah.
so that you can't lose sight of it.
But at this point, now you're either married, you're living together, you may have a child together, you are in it, right? And so like,
Yep.
how, and now you've reached the realization that it's not working, that something's wrong. How
Yeah.
the heck do you get out of a relationship like this?
Yeah. You're at the point.
Yeah.
I think the first thing you want to do is surround yourself with experts. You want to talk, if you have the means to do this. Not everybody does, but you could go to a bank or hire a professional in terms of financial planning and find out what are the laws in your state. They make a huge difference if you're in a shared property state or not. You want to surround yourself with your physician. You're likely to have physical problems at this point in time. You're not sleeping well. Maybe your stomach's upset because your gut reaction's telling you something. If you've had pre-existing or what we call premorbid conditions, they're going to flare at this point, maybe with hypertension or bruxism. So you want to see your physician. You want to maybe get a mental health clinician. And if you have the means, go hire a PI.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's nothing to hide, they're going to be confirming like the choice that you're making. Most charge about $2,000 to do a basic cursory review of what's going on. But you want to surround yourself with professionals. The other thing that you want to do is start thinking in terms of mitigating the potential financial damage that could come by freezing your credit reports, looking at making sure that your co-signers on everything is up to date in what you want. You might want to start having your own separate bank account. You want to copy all of your important documents so that they cannot be burned. That would be things like maybe your passport, your birth certificate, marriage license, adoption papers, pet license, insurance papers, whatever that might be. Get a copy of them, put them on a thumb drive, along with your important photos. So if your phone's destroyed, you still have that and your contact information, and put those all in a safe place. If things work out, nothing harmed. I mean, you've just got duplicates of the important stuff that you always need. And the other thing you want to do is to get an extra set of car keys and change your passwords on your accounts. The people are much more intelligent than I am in terms of finding out passwords, and the ways of doing it I don't even understand. But you want to do that, and you also want to look at your social media presence and say, do I want this stuff all to be out there, or should I cull through it and delete it, or delete it altogether? One of the things that I did before I even, quote, came out on social media with my history is I subscribed to Reputation Defender, which is a program that you buy. I think it's up to $500 a year, or maybe it's every 3 years that you pay. And it scrubs the internet for your information, and it gives it back to you on a monthly report. And you can say yay or nay. I want that in, I want that out. And I was hell-bent on not having my personal information out there after what I'd been through.
Yeah.
And I even challenged one of the detectives I knew after the homicide to go back and try to find me, and he couldn't do it.
Yep. And then, of course, you could pay for the service or you could do it on your own.
Yes.
I will include resources, free ways that you could do that too. I mean, but scrubbing yourself from the internet is a good idea in most scenarios. I mean, the less information about you that's out there, probably the better.
At this
point, your jars are completely lopsided. I don't even think they're relevant anymore because now you're in trouble, right? And one thing in addition to the things that you talked about, the real tactical things that you should do, like change your password, your bank account, all that, I also think that you should jot down a timeline of things. Because by the time someone starts talking to me, because the situation has gotten so out of control that, they're dealing with this massive con artist situation, everything is kind of fuzzy. And if you're talking to a private investigator, a detective, a psychologist, or somebody of authority, and they need to figure it out and they need to put these pieces together, having a timeline of all the marbles that were in the wrong jar is very critical, I think, in order to resolve the problem.
Yeah, and they're an objective outsider. They don't have any reason to lead you a different direction than straightforward, because they have your best interest at heart. They're advocating for you. And so at this point in time, you want to take stock and ask yourself, is this where I wanted my life to be at this point in time? And you're in deep and you might have regrets, but at this point in time, chalk it up to learning, cut your losses, and focus on the future rather than spending time beating yourself up. I mean, yes, learn from what you did, but then go forward and have a plan.
And I can't help but like wonder this whole time you're giving all this excellent advice, and it's coming from a place of from your profession. You're a psychologist, right? You're an expert at this. But
Right.
I can't help but think that a lot of these tips are maybe things that you personally ignored.
Oh, absolutely, I did. I was when we were married 11 years. He was 18 years older than me, and a lot of my time was spent commuting to graduate school and working on my dissertation. I wasn't even home much, and so he was willing to do the finances. I'm like, great, take him over. And there was no red flags. We had nobody knocking on our door saying your lights are going to be turned off or whatever. We lived in a comfortable home. I didn't worry about our finances. I didn't know a lot of his friends, but I didn't care at that point. I was so hooked on school. I didn't want to go to parties and meet his high school friends. Later, that was for later, and I wish I had, but I didn't. But you're absolutely right. This is kind of like hard-learned evidence, and had I had the foresight to know what I know now, I would have done things different.
Yeah.
I would have.
And just to remind our listeners, because it's been 4 years since you came on Pretend to tell your story, and your husband, Alan Canty, he was a prominent psychologist in Detroit, and he was living this double life. Now, I wouldn't say that he was a con artist in any way, but he was definitely deceiving you, right?
Definitely.
And he was involved with a young sex worker, and ultimately, that led to his gruesome murder. I mean, it's a horrific story, and you'll hear about it once you listen to the episode or if you read Jan's book about it. But it is just a terrible story. But to have your perspective now, looking back, it just means so much more to hear these tips coming from you.
Well, if the old me could talk to the new me, it would have been different. But yeah, it's hard run information, and that's why I did not date for 10 years after I became a widow. And my poor husband, I put him through it.
Yeah.
We were dating.
I can't imagine.
And he did not know much about. He had to pull it out of me. I was very reluctant to divulge information. Very reluctant to have him meet my daughters who I'd adopted. But he kept winning me over. And when I met his family, I loved them. And my girls took a liking to him. And I have a respect for people in the military, and he's a retired colonel. So there's a lot of positives that came out of it. And today, like I said, I was so lucky to have found him, and I'd marry him again in a New York minute. I would.
And that's
He's a good guy.
What a great way to end it, right? Because we just talked about all these horrible things that you need to look out for, but love is possible. People can,
Yes.
pass the bar, when it comes to setting boundaries for yourself and just being smart about the people that we let into our lives. But it's nice to know that in the end, it worked out, right? It worked out for you, and
It
you
did.
did find true love.
Definitely.
And that's a great way
Yep.
to end this. So
I did.
thank you, Jan. I appreciate it. And everyone, please check out Jan Canty's podcast, The Domino Effects of Murder. I'll have it linked in the podcast. And she has a book recounting her life story, which is phenomenal. And also, I'll link to the series that Jen and I worked on many years ago. And I'm so glad to see you again. I'm so glad that you are. I mean, you guys can't see this now, but you wouldn't know that I've been podcasting longer than Jan Canty. She has like soundproofing in the background and a really fancy red microphone with a pop filter. I mean, and matching headphones. So welcome to this fabulous world of podcasting. So.
I love it here.
Yeah.
And I thank you for encouraging me. You were a big influence on getting me up and running.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. I'm so glad our lives cross paths, and thank you for sharing all these great tips with everyone on the show.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, Jan.
You're welcome.
Creative Babble.